So continuing our coverage of all new, all different Marvel, what I want to do here is focus on Invincible Iron Man proper. And what we're going to find here is that rather than being a title like Spider-Man that draws on previous content, instead, Invincible Iron Man is largely going to be standalone. What I'd also like to point out here is that this story may contain some spoilers for Secret Wars. So in truth, the inspiration for Invincible Iron Man comes out of Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of the character, as well as a return to what made Iron Man popular in his initial introduction. What I mean here is that while Tony Stark was largely a background character and most commonly recognized by non-comic book readers due to his involvement with the Avengers, when Iron Man was released in 2008 and launched the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Robert Downey Jr. elevated the character to one of Marvel's top stars due to his devil-may-care attitude and his wit. At the same time, when Iron Man was first created in Marvel Comics, he was designed to be an adaptation of Howard Hughes, the famed billionaire businessman, inventor, and philanthropist of the 1950s and 1960s. Emerging during the Vietnam War, Tony Stark was designed by Marvel to represent everything that the youth of the time were against: military industrialism, war profiteering, weapons manufacturing, and the concept of war itself. While the late 1960s as well as the 1970s and 1980s would see his character take a different turn in terms of his view of himself as a weapons manufacturer to the various militaristic agencies of the world, in the end, the basis behind Tony Stark largely remained the same, and that he would flirt with women, engage in one-night stands, and generally had a lack of concern for the personal feelings of those around him, minus Pepper Potts and his chauffeur Happy Hogan. This was compounded on by the fact that, like Howard Hughes, Tony Stark was a recluse in a lot of ways. While he wouldn't ignore the world as a whole due to his responsibilities both as a superhero and a member of the Avengers team, during his downtime, his character was most likely found in his laboratory working on new models of the Iron Man armor in order to combat his evolving villains from his solo series, as well as the global threats presented in the Avengers stories. In this manner, Tony Stark's Iron Man armor was a metaphor for who he was on a fundamental level. What I mean here is that over the course of his publication history, stories like Demon in a Bottle cast aside the superhero cover and exposed Tony Stark for what he was, a man struggling with personal demons. For him, the Iron Man armor was an escape. Being able to confine himself within an almost indestructible body of metal meant that while he could remain physically protected from the various villains around him, more so than that, he could hide his perceived weakness from the friends around him. Indeed, while he was a hero and fought the good fight, on a personal level and for reasons that were never truly explored, Tony Stark hiding in his Iron Man armor, retreating to his laboratory in his spare time, and splitting the superhero community down the middle during the events of Civil War were all a reflection of the view that he had of himself, in that he didn't believe that the man he saw in the mirror was a good one. Instead, these aspects and the reclusive nature of his life were a reflection of his self-loathing, something that reached a fever pitch during the events of Superior Iron Man when he found himself tumbling down the metaphorical rabbit hole and losing everyone that mattered to him, including Pepper Potts. And so pulling these strings together and combining the personality of Tony Stark from the films and his personal struggles from the comics, what Bendis does here is provide us with a new line of Iron Man stories that are just as much about personal vindication and the attempt to start anew as they are about being a hero and saving the world. So Invincible Iron Man initially picks up with an unnamed man meeting a villainess named Whitney Frost, also known as Madame Mask. To sidetrack for a second, Madame Mask was a character that originally appeared in Tales of Suspense issue number 97 in 1968. While she doesn't have any powers in the traditional sense, she is prodigious in multiple forms of martial arts, as well as the art of disguise, espionage, and the use of firearms. Usually keeping her face hidden under a mask, hence her name, Whitney Frost and Tony Stark's relationship is very complicated in that during a story titled Even Heroes Die, which had taken place in Iron Man Volume 1, issue number 18 in 1969, she had been tasked with infiltrating Stark Industries and incapacitating Tony Stark. Although she was unsuccessful, she ended up developing an attraction to Tony, and while he initially returned her affections, over the course of their stories, the two went their own separate ways. While future events would see an on-again, off-again relationship between the two, Marvel eventually wrote her character in a way that depicted her as an angry ex-girlfriend, which led to a series of confrontations between the two, with Madame Mask eventually returning to her role as one of Tony Stark's villains. Now transitioning back to the story, as we're shown, a former employee of the terrorist group Advanced Idea Mechanics had defected and brought an unidentified object with him. With the deal expected to see the item exchanged for a large sum of money, Madame Mask breaks her into the bargain and kills the man instead. Transitioning to Iron Man himself, the story begins to focus directly on Tony Stark for the duration of this comic. What Bendis does here is put the emphasis on returning Tony Stark to his roots as an inventor. What we're told is that at some point between the end of Secret Wars and the beginning of All New All Different Marvel, a 15-year-old kid from MIT had managed to duplicate one of his previous armors. Whether or not these plans found their way onto the black market is never really explained here, but Bendis seems to hint that this is the case, with a newspaper stating that Tony Stark is yesterday's future. Furthermore, following the reveal of his armor technology, Stark had returned to his laboratory for the purpose of designing a new set of armor from the ground up. While the armor isn't given a marked designation, what we are told is that this new suit is the best of his previous designs. Connected to the brain synapses of Stark himself, this connection allows the armor to function seamlessly with Tony, in addition to changing its shape and color scheme based on the mission parameters. Where Bendis initially leaves us a little ambiguous in terms of how these changes physically manifest, the intention of Tony is to take the armor out for a test, but he's refused by his new AI. Now this is something I'd like you to take particular notice of because this will leave some lingering questions at the end of this issue. The new AI that Stark uses is called Friday and is a hologram projection of someone that could be Pepper Potts, Mary Jane Watson, or neither. Again, while we won't find out in this comic, with Bendis having previously alluded to the idea that Mary Jane Watson would replace Pepper Potts as the main woman of Stark's life, many fans have taken to believing that this may be a version of Pepper, something that seems to have credence since the events of Superior Iron Man saw the two going their own separate ways, in addition to Bendis stating that Pepper would return at some point in this new series. However, during their conversation, Friday reminds Stark that the new armor will need several hours to charge, and that Tony has a date with a woman named Amara Pereira in 1 hour. Transitioning to the date, Bendis continues a trend of adding depth to the roster of the Iron Man cast in the sense that Amara is presented as extremely intelligent, but he also maintains a comedic tone of the Iron Man comics. What I mean here is that with the two having met at a restaurant, Tony Stark had actually reserved it for the night and was essentially pulling out his old tricks in an effort to impress Amara. While she picks up on what he's doing almost immediately and casually dismisses it, he also jokes that if he were looking to impress her, he would have Thor accidentally show up, and when Amara states that she would leave if he did, Stark sends Thor away. In a more serious tone though, Amara is also presented in a manner which indicates that she seems to be someone with the potential to keep Tony Stark grounded. As she states, Tony's reputation and accomplishments speak for itself, and the best way for the two to enjoy the evening is for Tony to be himself and cast aside the charade. Accepting his offer, Bendis establishes the intelligence of Amara in that when Stark questions her about the inventions that she's kept private, she admits that she was able to make a cure for the mutant gene. Now, where some fans dislike the casual throwaway of such an important achievement, in truth, this reveal wasn't really designed to be thrown away so much as to illustrate the fact that because a genetic cure for the mutant gene which doesn't damage the mutant in question was previously non-existent, while this doesn't make Amara as smart as Reed Richards, what it does do is present the scenario that she's smarter than Tony Stark, since this is something that he's never been able to achieve. However, the date between the two is cut short when Friday appears informing Tony Stark that Madame Mask had returned. More so than that, she's broken into Castle Doomstadt in Latveria and stolen an unknown device. Transitioning to Latveria itself, the home of Dr. Doom is revealed to have been completely demolished. As Friday tells us, at some point between the end of Secret Wars and the start of All New All Different Marvel, Dr. Doom had lost control of Latveria due to a civil war. Finding himself at gunpoint at the hands of the leader of one of the revolutionary groups, Stark initially tried to plead his case and saying that the purpose of his arrival is to help them recover something that was stolen from Castle Doom. And while the language barrier prevents the revolutionaries from understanding Stark, the group is suddenly met with a sonic device that incapacitates everyone but Iron Man. Turning to find out who it was that set off the sonic device, Friday reveals that the person responsible is Victor Von Doom. Now again, this raises massive questions regarding Secret Wars and really serves to highlight the problem that arises when a new event is started before the old one ends. And while I would love to answer the questions that you no doubt have, the truth is that until Secret Wars ends and the 8-month gap prior to All New All Different Marvel is filled, I'm essentially in the same boat as you are. With that being said, I will catch you guys later. Peace.